I'm John Caldera. I'm the president of the Independence Institute. Get those people in the back to stop chatting. Had the same problem in grade school. You guys didn't learn then, you don't learn now. This is one of those very, very odd events where we find out that many of the fights we have towards liberty have different allies. And it's great to see an issue that has so much support from both the left and the right as the Citizens Initiative process and the threats here in Colorado. I don't think we quite realize what's going on here in Colorado, but Colorado is really becoming ground zero for our protection of the citizens' right to have a voice in government. There are 24 states that have the initiative process, and I don't know, maybe John Fund will be able to tell us a bit more in detail, if there's any state that has so many attacks on the citizen initiative process. And they've been growing year after year after year. They've been growing tougher. And even now with the lawsuit against Tabor, it's not a lawsuit against Tabor, it's a lawsuit against the initiative process. I don't know if you've kept up with this, and I think we'll be able to talk about it a bit during the panel discussion, but I've been, and Linda Gorman and I have been on the receiving end of lots of lawsuits, thanks to a lot of the new rules here in Colorado. It's been a remarkably expensive and terrific project. So I can't tell you how thrilling it is after 2 decades of activism in government to have my entire livelihood and my home up for potential bankruptcy because I just wanted people to be able to vote on an initiative, but I could lose it all in legal fees. Shane Madsen will talk about that in some time. I really want to thank Paul Jacob, who's going to help steer this when we get going, from Citizens in Charge. Paul Jacob not only walks the walk, he did the time in the jail to be able to do it. In Oklahoma, he was arrested for petitioning, which is, of course, something the founders would really love. So tell us that story as well. First, we're going to kick it off. I want to introduce a couple of great folks, including John Fund from the Wall Street Journal. You've read his work, you've seen him online, and of course you've seen him on Fox. I don't know anybody in national media who knows more about what's going on in the States than John Fund. And it's a wealth of information, and therefore I dislike him. But I know him for a long, long time. Joe Trippi is someone I haven't met yet. Where is Joe? Joe has worked for some really terrible people and done good things for them. And we're going to hear from Joe on how the new world of that has worked. He'll introduce himself. I want to thank folks like Common Cause, who, while we don't see eye to eye on many things, understand that even if we disagree on issues, the ability for people to be able to ask the citizenry to put things on the ballot is a right here in Colorado. While we might disagree on some of the things we vote on this, we've been able to do it, so it's been wonderful to work with. Tell you what, without further ado, John Fund, why don't you come up here and tell us just a tiny fraction of what you know, keeping an eye on the schedule. I want to thank you all for coming out on a Thursday night, and I think this is one of those sleeper issues that Colorado is unaware of. But there's some people out there about ready to strangle the initiative process, and we're going to stop. John, thank you.
Well, thank you for coming out on an evening this close to the holiday weekend. It shows your real commitment to civics. John, there's a reason why I know as much as I do about the states, because in every state I have good sources. And one of my best sources in Colorado is John Caldera of the Independence Institute. So a reporter is only as good as his sources. Best. It is a pleasure for me to come to Colorado. It's one of my favorite states on the west here. Grew up in California, but I have many friends and a couple of relatives here. And especially pleasing for me to come because I wanted to come because I know we have so many readers and subscribers to the Wall Street Journal here. If you read and subscribe to the Journal, raise your hand. And of course I work for Fox News. If you watch Fox News, raise your hand. See, I think we've covered the entire audience with your questions. So it's the least I can do to come and thank you for helping with me my salary, which you do. Joe Trippi and I are speaking together, and we're a little odd couple, but not so much. because we both care about democracy. And the initiative process in recent years, in the 24 states that allow a version of it, is often characterized as being more of a conservative party type initiative. Well, not really. I mean, we only have to go back to the 1980s to the nuclear freeze initiatives, and it was the left that was using them to great effect. Even when they couldn't change the law, they stirred up popular opinion. The initiative process began 100 years ago, almost exactly, as part of the progressive era. And people from the right and the left and the center got together 100 years ago, and I can speak with authority from my home state of California. They realized that special interests had captured the legislatures in many states. In California, it was the railroad interests. In other states, it was manufacturing or liquor interests. And they decided that they needed some kind of a check on the legislature that could be captured by special interests. The initiative process became that vehicle. And it was very effective. It's been effective in Colorado. 150 times the Constitution has been changed by initiative or referendum in the state. By the way, 2/3 of those have been put on the ballot by the legislature itself. So if you ever hear complaints in Colorado that the ballot is polluted or cluttered, or there's too much change in the Constitution, or the Constitution is too long or too complex, well, the people can take about 1/3 of the responsibility for that. At most, the legislature gets 2/3 of the responsibility, but you never hear about that part. The initiative process came out of the progressive era, and it obviously worked to curb the power of special interests. Today, it's needed more than ever. And I'm going to quote a very unusual source on that. I was at a conference of the Pete Peterson Foundation on fiscal crisis this country is facing yesterday in Washington. One of the main speakers was Bill Clinton. And he made the very powerful point that we are no longer a young country. We have been around, we're the oldest democracy with a continuous constitution. We've been around for 230 years. If you follow the work of the great late social scientist Manker Olson and other political scientists, the longer a stable democracy is around, the more barnacles it creates. Barnacles that sometimes get attached to a ship of state to slow it down. What Clinton said is, we have a system in which there are an awful lot of people who have a stake in the past and not changing things, and not as many people with a stake in the future or a dynamic change. But a country, if it's going to remain vibrant, if it's going to remain young at heart and mind, if it's going to be able to compete with places like India and China, which were nowhere on our radar screen economically or geopolitically 50 years ago, we're going to have to embrace change. Now, change is difficult for people. It's even more difficult if you have the status quo entrenched in legislatures and there's no way to get them moved off of the present or to get the dead weight of the past. What Clinton said, and he didn't talk about the initiative process directly, but he said, we need to convince people that we have to tackle our debt problem and our fiscal problems because those are dead weight associated with the past. We cannot live in the past, we cannot be bound by the past. We have to live for the future and make sure our children and grandchildren inherit a country as dynamic and free and prosperous as we have today and have in the past. I agree with Bill Clinton. The initiative process is one of the single most dynamic ways of injecting change into a calcified system. Now, I'm from California. I will tell you exactly that the initiative process in California is very discredited. Everybody attacks it for something. All the ills of the world are blamed on initiatives that have been passed, whether it's Prop 13 or term limits, or the initiative that dedicated a certain amount of money to public education. This is easily understood because it's much easier to attack a process, indirectly attack the people, than it is to attack specific problems in the system, namely the state legislators themselves, the bureaucracy, various special interests by name that have inserted their agenda and dominate political dialogue in California. It's always easy to attack the inchoate initiative process. But ultimately, you're attacking the right of the people to govern themselves. Make no mistake about it. An attack on the initiative process is an attack on the right of the people. Now, the people can make mistakes, but I can tell you as a former legislative staffer, I have worked with members of Congress for 25 years now. The people will make fewer mistakes than the typical legislature. If you don't believe me, just go down to the legislative hearing. State capitol. You will learn soon enough. Now, very quickly, because I want to hear from Joe, in Colorado, you have had perhaps the most outrageous attacks on the initiative process I have ever seen. To declare that someone who fills out an initiative petition with signatures that qualify an initiative for the ballot, to declare if they fill out the address improperly, that is an act of fraud and subject to the full criminal penalties of the law. And to declare that someone like John Caldera, who was trying to get an initiative on the ballot last year, the healthcare mandate initiative, to declare that he is personally responsible and liable for lawsuits for people who he did not directly control, who may have filled out that initiative petition indirectly, and can be bankrupted because of it, and the lawsuits can be brought not by the government but by private parties with an axe to grind, is outrageous. It is an attempt to intimidate people from practicing democracy. And people from both the left and the right and the center should stand up and say, we the people, you the government, me in charge. That's what we have to say. Lastly, we always hear that these changes are supported in a bipartisan fashion. If you go down right now, the failed measure on the state capitol increase the provision that would be required is that 60% of people would have to vote for initiatives that would take effect. It was bipartisan. The Republican House Speaker and the Democratic State Senate President were on board. We have people from both parties endorsing this. You know, we like to think that being bipartisan is a good thing, and it can be. But I have spent enough time in Washington to learn this. In Washington, the joke is that there is a stupid party and an evil party, and which is which depends on where you come from. But always beware in Washington, and I suspect in Denver as well, always beware of an initiative or a bill or a proposal that claims to be bipartisan. Because that may mean that the stupid party and evil party have gotten together and forged a compromise that they produce legislation that is both stupid and evil. I fear that that's what you're going to get in Colorado if you ever allow the legislators to touch your sacred right of initiative. Thanks very much.